Marcus Chen had always believed he was untouchable. Standing 6 feet tall with muscles carved from years of rigorous training, he commanded respect wherever he walked. His black belt wasn't just a piece of cloth around his waist. It was his identity, his pride, his entire world wrapped up in one symbol of martial arts mastery. The local dojo where Marcus taught had become legendary in the small coastal town of Millbrook. Students would drive from neighboring cities just to learn from the man who had never lost a fight, never backed down from a challenge, and never shown an ounce of doubt in his abilities. His reputation preceded him like a shadow, and he wore it like armor. Every morning at dawn, Marcus would begin his routine with the same ritual that had defined his life for the past 15 years. He would bow to the photograph of his late master, Master Takeshi, whose weathered face seemed to watch over the dojo with eternal wisdom. The old man had found Marcus as a troubled teenager, channeling his anger and frustration into something powerful and disciplined. Strength without humility is just violence waiting to happen, Master Takeshi used to say, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent perfecting his craft. But Marcus had always focused more on the strength part of that equation. The humility seemed like an unnecessary burden for someone with his natural talent. The morning sun filtered through the dojo windows as Marcus practiced his forms, each movement precise and devastating. His students would arrive soon, eager to learn from someone they viewed as invincible. Young fighters, middle-aged professionals seeking confidence, even some local police officers. They all came to learn from Marcus Chen, the man who had turned martial arts into an art form. But today felt different. Today, Marcus had received an invitation that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. The thick cream-colored envelope bore an official seal he didn't recognize, and the formal language inside spoke of a demonstration at the Royal Palace, 3 hours away in the capital city. The letter explained that the Royal Guard was seeking to expand their training methods and had heard of Marcus's exceptional skills. They wanted him to demonstrate his techniques to their elite security force, with the possibility of becoming an official instructor for the palace guards. It was the opportunity Marcus had been waiting for his entire career, a chance to prove his superiority on the grandest stage possible. As he read the letter for the third time, Marcus couldn't help but smile. Finally, someone with real authority had recognized his talents. The Royal Palace wasn't just any venue. It was where the most elite fighters in the country served. If he could impress them, his reputation would spread far beyond the small town, where he'd built his legacy. He had heard stories about the Royal Guard, of course. They were supposedly the finest warriors in the land, hand-picked from military special forces and trained in techniques that were closely guarded secrets. But Marcus had always suspected these stories were exaggerated. How could they be better than him? He had devoted his entire life to perfecting his craft, while they were probably just glorified security guards with fancy uniforms. The demonstration was scheduled for the following week, giving Marcus plenty of time to prepare his most impressive techniques. He decided he would show them his signature move, the Thunderstrike, a devastating combination that had never failed to overwhelm his opponents. He would also demonstrate his defensive capabilities, his speed, and his tactical thinking. By the end of the demonstration, they would be begging him to join their ranks. Marcus spent the rest of the day training with renewed intensity. His students noticed the change immediately. Their instructor was pushing himself harder than usual, his movements sharper and more focused. When young Tommy, one of his most promising students, asked about the increased intensity, Marcus simply smiled and said he had something important coming up. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment above the dojo, looking at his collection of trophies and certificates. Regional championships, national competitions, exhibition matches, he had conquered them all. The walls were covered with photographs of him receiving awards, newspaper clippings about his victories, and testimonials from grateful students. This apartment was a shrine to his success, and soon it would house even greater honors. He pulled out his phone and called his sister Sarah, the only family member who still spoke to him regularly. The others had grown tired of his constant boasting over the years, but Sarah remained supportive even if she sometimes worried about his ego. I got invited to demonstrate at the Royal Palace, Marcus announced without preamble. That's wonderful, Marcus, Sarah replied, though he could hear the caution in her voice. Just remember to stay humble. These palace guards have probably seen everything. Humble. There was that word again. Marcus brushed off her concern with a laugh. Sarah, I've been preparing for this my entire life. These guards might be tough, but they've never faced anyone like me. This is my chance to show the world what real martial arts looks like. After hanging up, Marcus returned to his evening meditation, a practice Master Takeshi had insisted upon. But tonight, instead of finding inner peace, his mind raced with visions of glory. He imagined the impressed faces of the royal guard as he demonstrated techniques they had never seen before. He pictured himself being offered a position of honor, perhaps even becoming the chief instructor for the entire palace security force. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus refined his techniques, selected his best uniform, and even practiced the speech he would give after his successful demonstration. He was so confident in his abilities that he had already begun planning how he would expand his dojo once his reputation reached new heights. The night before the demonstration, Marcus stood in his dojo one final time, bowing to Master Takeshi's photograph. Tomorrow would be the day that changed everything. Tomorrow the world would finally see Marcus Chen for what he truly was, the greatest martial artist of his generation. What he didn't realize was that the world was indeed about to see him for what he truly was, but not in the way he expected. The royal palace stood before Marcus like a fortress of dreams, its towering walls and gleaming spires reaching toward the cloudy morning sky. As his taxi pulled through the ornate gates, Marcus felt his heart racing with anticipation. This was at the moment he had been training for his entire life. The guards at the entrance wore crisp uniforms and moved with a precision that impressed even Marcus, though he quickly reminded himself that precision and real fighting ability were two different things. Commander Harrison, a stern-faced man in his 50s with graying temples and sharp eyes, met Marcus at the main entrance. His handshake was firm but not challenging, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades in military service. The commander's uniform was immaculate, decorated with medals that spoke of real combat experience. But Marcus barely noticed these details. His mind was focused on the demonstration ahead. "Welcome to the Royal Palace, Master Chen," the commander said formally. "We've heard impressive things about your skills. Our guards are eager to see what you can teach them." Marcus straightened his shoulders and adjusted his black belt. "Commander Harrison, I'm honored to be here. I think you'll find my techniques quite educational." As they walked through the palace corridors, Marcus was struck by the grandeur surrounding him. Portraits of ancient kings and queens lined the walls, and every surface seemed to gleam with polish and care. Servants moved quietly through the halls, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets. This was a world of power and privilege, and soon Marcus would be part of it. The commander led him to a large training facility that looked more like a modern gymnasium than the traditional dojos Marcus was used to. The floors were covered with professional-grade mats, and various training equipment lined the walls. What caught Marcus's attention immediately, however, were the men and women already assembled in the center of the room. 20 royal guards stood in perfect formation, their casual training clothes unable to hide the deadly efficiency in their posture. These weren't the ceremonial guards tourists saw at the palace gates. These were the real protectors, the ones who would lay down their lives without hesitation. Their faces showed no emotion as Marcus entered, but their eyes tracked his every movement with the alertness of predators. "Guards, this is Master Marcus Chen," the commander announced. "He'll be demonstrating some martial arts techniques that might enhance our training program. Please give him your full attention." Marcus stepped forward, bowing respectfully to the assembled group. This was his moment to shine, and he intended to make the most of it. He had planned his demonstration carefully, starting with some basic forms to show his technical precision, then moving to more advanced techniques that would truly impress them. "Thank you, Commander Harrison," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've spent 15 years perfecting the art of karate. and I'm excited to share some techniques with you today. These methods have proven effective in countless real-world situations. He began with his warm-up routine, flowing through a series of movements that showcased his flexibility and control. His forms were indeed flawless. Every punch crisp, every kick precisely placed, every stance balanced and powerful. The guards watched silently, their expressions unreadable, but Marcus took their attention as a sign of impressed respect. Moving into more advanced demonstrations, Marcus performed his signature combinations with increasing confidence. He broke wooden boards with devastating strikes, demonstrated lightning-fast defensive movements, and even performed some acrobatic techniques that drew murmurs of appreciation from a few of the younger guards. These techniques, Marcus explained as he finished a particularly complex sequence, represent the pinnacle of martial arts development. They require years of dedicated training to master, but once perfected, they make a fighter virtually unstoppable. Commander, Harrison nodded politely. Very impressive, Master Chen. Your technical skill is evident. However, our guards are more interested in practical applications. Perhaps you could demonstrate these techniques against a live opponent? This was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. A chance to show not just his forms but his actual fighting ability against one of the supposedly elite royal guards. He smiled confidently and gestured toward the assembled group. I'd be happy to demonstrate with any volunteer. Just remember, I'll need to hold back significantly to avoid injury. A ripple of something, amusement, surprise, passed through the group of guards, but their faces remained professional. Commander Harrison looked among his people and selected a guard who appeared to be in his early 30s, average height, with an unremarkable build that suggested more endurance than explosive power. Lieutenant Stevens, would you mind assisting with the demonstration? Lieutenant Stevens stepped forward with a casual confidence that Marcus found mildly insulting. The man didn't even seem nervous about facing someone of Marcus's reputation. His movement was economical and relaxed, like someone approaching a routine training exercise, rather than a confrontation with a legendary martial artist. What would you like me to do, Master Chen? Stevens asked politely. Marcus studied his opponent quickly. The lieutenant was clearly in good physical condition, but he lacked the intimidating presence Marcus was used to seeing in serious fighters. His stance was relaxed, almost casual, and he showed none of the respect Marcus typically received from opponents who knew his reputation. Let's start with something simple, Marcus said, settling into his fighting stance. Try to land a strike on me and I'll demonstrate proper defensive techniques followed by a controlled counterattack. Stevens nodded and assumed what Marcus recognized as a basic military fighting position. It was competent enough, but Marcus had seen similar stances countless times in his career. Nothing special, nothing that suggested the legendary skills he'd heard attributed to the Royal Guard. Whenever you're ready, Marcus announced, his confidence reaching its peak. Stevens moved forward with a simple, direct punch aimed at Marcus's midsection. It was fast enough, Marcus acknowledged, but predictable and straightforward. Exactly the kind of attack his training had prepared him to handle effortlessly. This would be easy. He would slip the punch, demonstrate a perfect counter combination, and show these guards what real martial arts looked like. But as Stevens's fist approached, something felt wrong. The punch looked simple, but there was something in the lieutenant's eyes, a depth of focus that Marcus had only seen in mirrors. The strike came faster than expected, with more precision than its straightforward appearance suggested. Marcus began his defensive movement, confident in his ability to slip the attack and respond with devastating effectiveness. In his mind, he was already planning his follow-up techniques and the impressed reactions he would receive. This demonstration would be talked about for years, cementing his reputation as one of the greatest martial artists alive. What happened next would indeed be talked about for years, but not in the way Marcus expected. The world seemed to slow down as Marcus began his defensive movement. In his mind, he was executing the perfect slip, a technique he had performed thousands of times in training and dozens of times in real confrontations. His body moved with the muscle memory of 15 years of dedicated practice, shifting weight, angling his torso, preparing to demonstrate the superiority of his martial arts training. But Lieutenant Stevens's punch didn't arrive where Marcus expected it to be. Instead of the straightforward strike Marcus had anticipated, Stevens's fist curved at the last second, adjusting its trajectory with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The lieutenant's body moved like water, adapting to Marcus's defensive movement before Marcus had even completed it. What had appeared to be a simple, predictable attack revealed itself as something far more sophisticated. A technique that used Marcus's own expectations against him. The punch connected, not with devastating force, but with surgical precision. Stevens struck a pressure point just below Marcus's ribcage, a spot that Marcus didn't even know existed until that moment. The impact sent a shockwave through his nervous system that had nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with complete muscular disruption. Marcus's legs simply stopped working. He collapsed to the mat like a marionette whose strings had been cut, his mind still trying to process what had just happened. The confident smirk he had worn moments before was replaced by confusion, then embarrassment, then growing horror as the reality of the situation sank in. The training room fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing as he struggled to regain control of his body. The numbness was wearing off, but the damage to his pride was just beginning. 20 of the kingdom's most elite guards had just watched him, the legendary Marcus Chen, get dropped by what appeared to be a casual, effortless technique. Lieutenant, Stevens extended a hand to help Marcus to his feet, his expression showing no trace of triumph or mockery, just professional courtesy tinged with what might have been sympathy. "Are you all right, Master Chen?" Stevens asked genuinely. "I should have warned you about that technique. We sometimes forget that civilian martial artists aren't familiar with our methods." Civilian martial artists. The words hit Marcus harder than the punch had. In one casual phrase, Stevens had relegated Marcus's entire life's work to amateur status. The man who had never lost a fight, who commanded respect throughout his region, who had been preparing to become an instructor to the kingdom's elite, he was just a civilian martial artist. Marcus accepted the offered hand and stood on unsteady legs, his face burning with shame. Around the room, the other guards maintained their professional demeanor, but Marcus could feel their assessment of him changing by the second. He had arrived as a respected master demonstrating techniques to eager students. Now he was something else entirely, a humbled amateur learning that his understanding of combat was incomplete. Commander Harrison stepped forward, his voice carefully neutral. "Master Chen, are you injured? Lieutenant Stevens is quite skilled, but perhaps we should have started with something less dynamic." The kindness in the commander's voice only made things worse. Marcus could handle mockery, could fight back against dismissal or disrespect. But this gentle understanding, this recognition that he was out of his depth, cut deeper than any insult could have. "I'm fine," Marcus managed to say, though his voice came out smaller than he intended. That was a very interesting technique. I'd like to try again if you don't mind." Several of the guards exchanged glances. Lieutenant Stevens looked to Commander Harrison, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, Master Chen," Stevens said diplomatically, "but perhaps this time, let me show you the technique slowly first, so you understand what you're defending against." Marcus's pride screamed against this suggestion. He was supposed to be the teacher here, not the student. But his legs were still shaky, and his confidence was thoroughly shattered. He nodded reluctantly. Stevens moved into position and began to demonstrate the technique he had used, breaking it down into components. What Marcus had perceived as a simple punch was actually a complex sequence involving misdirection, adaptive, targeting, and precise anatomical knowledge. The lieutenant explained how the initial movement was designed to draw the opponent's defensive response, how the trajectory could be adjusted mid-strike based on that response, and how the specific pressure point he had targeted would disrupt nerve signals without causing lasting damage. "This is based on a combination of traditional martial arts and modern neuroscience," Stevens explained patiently. "We study anatomy extensively, Not just muscle groups and bone structure, but nerve pathways, pressure points, and psychological responses. Our combat system is designed for maximum efficiency against opponents who might be physically superior. As Stevens spoke, Marcus began to understand the vast gap between his traditional karate training and what he was witnessing. These guards weren't just physically fit soldiers. They were combat scientists who had studied every aspect of human confrontation with the same dedication Marcus had applied to his forms and techniques. The demonstration continued with other guards showing different aspects of their training. Marcus watched in growing amazement as they demonstrated techniques that seemed to violate everything he thought he knew about martial arts. They moved with an efficiency that made his own movements seem theatrical by comparison, and their understanding of combat psychology was beyond anything he had encountered. One guard, a woman named Sergeant Martinez, who appeared to be in her 40s, demonstrated how to read an opponent's intentions from micro-expressions and body language cues. She could predict attacks seconds before they were launched, giving her what appeared to be supernatural reflexes. Another guard, Corporal Johnson, showed how they used environmental awareness as a weapon, turning ordinary objects and spatial relationships into tactical advantages. His demonstration made Marcus realize that he had been thinking of fighting as something that happened in isolation, while these guards saw it as part of a larger system of variables. But it was Lieutenant Stevens who delivered the final lesson of the day. As the formal demonstrations concluded, he approached Marcus with genuine respect. "Master Chen," Stevens said quietly, "I hope you understand that what happened earlier wasn't about your skill level. Your techniques are impressive, and your dedication is obvious. It's just that we've had the advantage of training methods that most martial artists never encounter. Traditional schools teach excellent fundamentals, but they don't always have access to the latest developments in combat science." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The lieutenant's kindness was genuine, but it couldn't change what had happened. He had come here expecting to teach, and instead he had received an education that fundamentally challenged everything he thought he knew about fighting. As the session ended and the guards began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing alone, in the center of the mat where his confidence had died. The man who had entered this room was gone, replaced by someone who was just beginning to understand how much he didn't know. The ride home from the royal palace felt like the longest 3 hours of Marcus's life. He sat in the back of the taxi, staring out at the familiar countryside that now seemed somehow different, as if he was seeing it through new eyes. The driver, a cheerful man who had picked up hundreds of passengers over the years, tried to make conversation about the weather and local news, but Marcus could barely manage single-word responses. His phone buzzed constantly with text messages from students, asking how the demonstration had gone. Sarah had sent 3 messages, each more excited than the last, wanting to hear about his triumph at the palace. His assistant instructor had texted to say that several new students had signed up after hearing about Marcus's royal invitation. Everyone expected to hear about his success, his validation as one of the kingdom's premier martial artists. Instead, Marcus turned off his phone and watched the world blur past his window. By the time the taxi pulled up to his dojo, the afternoon training session was already underway. Through the large windows, Marcus could see his students practicing the forms he had taught them, moving with the precision and confidence he had instilled in them over months and years of instruction. Young Tommy was leading a group of newer students through basic combinations, his technique crisp and his explanations clear, exactly as Marcus had trained him. But now, watching from outside, Marcus saw his students differently. Their movements, which had seemed so impressive just that morning, now appeared somehow limited. They were performing techniques perfectly, but they were techniques from a world Marcus was beginning to realize was much smaller than he had imagined. He entered through the back door, hoping to avoid the students until he could process what had happened. But Tommy spotted him immediately and came running over, his face bright with excitement. "Master Chen, how did it go? Did you blow them away with the thunder strike? Are you going to be training the Royal Guard now?" Marcus looked at his most dedicated student, a young man who had transformed from an insecure teenager into a confident fighter under Marcus's guidance, and felt something break inside his chest. How could he explain what had happened? How could he tell Tommy that everything they had been working toward, everything they had believed about their abilities had been built on incomplete understanding? It was educational, Marcus managed to say. Tommy's face fell slightly at the lack of enthusiasm in his instructor's voice, but he pressed on. What were they like? Were they as good as everyone says? I bet they learned a lot from watching you fight. Before Marcus could respond, the rest of the class had noticed his return. Students gathered around him, all talking at once, asking questions about the palace, about the guards, about when he would start his new position training the kingdom's elite. Their faith in him was absolute, their admiration genuine, and it made Marcus feel like a fraud. He excused himself and retreated to his office above the dojo, claiming he needed to make some important phone calls. But instead of calling anyone, Marcus sat at his desk and stared at the wall of awards and photographs that had once been his greatest source of pride. The certificates suddenly looked different, smaller somehow, less impressive. Regional championships, local competitions, exhibition matches against opponents who had learned the same limited techniques Marcus himself had mastered. None of them had faced someone like Lieutenant Stevens. None of them had encountered the sophisticated combat science the Royal Guard had developed. Marcus pulled out his laptop and began searching online for information about the Royal Guard's training methods. What he found only deepened his growing sense of inadequacy. Articles about their selective recruitment process, their multi-year training programs that combine traditional martial arts with modern military science, psychology, neuroscience, and tactical analysis. These weren't just fighters. They were scholars of combat, dedicated to understanding every aspect of human conflict. He found videos of demonstrations the guards had given at international military conferences, showing techniques that made his own abilities look primitive by comparison. The comment sections were filled with praise from special forces operators, competitive fighters, and martial arts masters from around the world. People who clearly understood they were witnessing something revolutionary. One comment, from a user identified as a former Navy SEAL instructor, particularly stung. These guys are operating on a completely different level than traditional martial artists. They've moved beyond technique-based fighting into something that's more like applied human engineering. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. Applied human engineering. Marcus had spent his entire adult life believing he was a master of human combat, only to discover he had been working with an incomplete understanding of what that even meant. That evening, instead of teaching his advanced class as scheduled, Marcus asked Tommy to take over while he dealt with some administrative issues. He watched from his office as his most senior student led the other advanced practitioners through the same routines Marcus had been teaching for years, routines that now seemed quaint and outdated. The students performed flawlessly, their respect for Marcus evident in every movement. They had complete faith in what he had taught them, just as he had once had complete faith in what Master Takeshi had taught him. The thought made Marcus wonder, had his own master known about the limitations of their traditional approach? Had Master Takeshi been aware that there were levels of combat knowledge beyond what he was passing on? Marcus remembered his master's emphasis on humility, the constant reminders that strength without wisdom was just violence waiting to happen. A.D. The time Marcus had interpreted this as philosophical wisdom, something meant to keep students grounded and respectful. Now he wondered if Master Takeshi had been trying to prepare him for exactly this kind of revelation, the discovery that no matter how much you know, there's always more to learn. The phone rang, startling Marcus from his thoughts. It was Sarah, calling to hear about his day at the palace. Marcus, I've been waiting all day to hear how it went. Did they offer you a position? Are you going to be training royalty now? Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It didn't go quite as planned, Sarah. What do you mean? What happened? How could he explain? How could he tell his sister, who had always supported his dreams and believed in his abilities, that he had been completely outclassed by people he had expected to impress? I learned that I have a lot more to learn, he said finally. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then her voice softened with understanding. Oh, Marcus, what happened? So he told her. Everything. The demonstration that had gone wrong, the technique, That had dropped him like a stone. The casual way the guards had shown him how little he actually knew about real combat. He talked about the videos he had watched, the research he had done, the growing realization that his entire worldview had been built on incomplete information. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or understanding. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said finally. "That I'm not as good as I thought I was?" "No, Marcus. It means you have the chance to become better than you ever imagined possible." The words hit Marcus like another precision strike, but this time they sparked something different than shame. For the first time since leaving the palace, he felt something other than defeat. Sarah was right. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. He had spent 15 years perfecting one approach to martial arts, but now he had glimpsed something far more sophisticated. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Marcus didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his dojo's meditation corner, surrounded by the familiar photos and awards that had once defined his identity. But rather than dwelling on his humiliation, he found himself thinking about Master Takeshi's teachings with new understanding. His old master had always emphasized that true strength came from knowing your weaknesses, that wisdom began with admitting ignorance. At the time, Marcus had thought these were just philosophical sayings meant to keep students humble. Now he realized Master Takeshi had been preparing him for exactly this moment, the moment when his understanding of martial arts would be challenged, and he would have to choose between defending his ego and embracing growth. When dawn broke, Marcus had made his decision. He picked up his phone and found the business card Commander Harrison had given him before he left the palace. The commander had said to call if he had any questions about what he had witnessed. Marcus suspected the invitation went deeper than simple curiosity. The phone rang twice before the familiar authoritative voice answered. "Commander Harrison speaking." "Commander, this is Marcus Chen, from yesterday's demonstration." "Master Chen, good morning. I was hoping you might call. How are you feeling after yesterday's session?" Marcus appreciated that the commander didn't try to sugarcoat what had happened, or pretend it had been anything other than a complete education in his own limitations. "Humbled," Marcus said honestly. "And curious. I've been researching your training methods, and I realize I witnessed something yesterday that's far beyond anything I've ever encountered. I need to ask you something directly. Was this demonstration actually a test?" There was a pause, then a soft chuckle from the commander. "You're perceptive, Master Chen." "Yes, in a way it was. We occasionally invite skilled civilian martial artists to demonstrate for our guards, partly for their education and partly to evaluate potential candidates for advanced training programs." "Candidates for what?" "We run a civilian integration program for exceptional martial artists who show the right combination of skill, humility, and adaptability. It's a year-long course that teaches our methods to people who might eventually become instructors at military academies or special training facilities. But it requires starting over completely, setting aside everything you think you know about combat and building from the ground up." Marcus felt his heart racing. This was the opportunity he hadn't known he was looking for. What would that involve? "Complete ego death," the commander said bluntly. "You'd train alongside our newest recruits, learning basic techniques you might think are beneath you. You'd study subjects that have nothing to do with traditional martial arts, psychology, anatomy, physics, even computer modeling of human movement. You'd be challenged in ways that might make yesterday look gentle." The honesty was both intimidating and appealing. Marcus thought about his students, his dojo, the life he had built around his current level of expertise. "I'm interested," he said before he could change his mind. "I thought you might be. The next program begins in 3 months. That gives you time to arrange your affairs and prepare mentally for what you'll be undertaking. But Master Chen, Marcus, I need you to understand something. This program has a high dropout rate. Many skilled fighters can't handle having their assumptions challenged so completely. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Marcus looked around his dojo one more time, seeing it now as both his greatest achievement and the foundation for something even greater. "Commander, yesterday I thought I was as good as I could get. Today I realize I was just getting started. Yes, I'm ready. Over the following weeks, Marcus began the difficult process of preparing for his new journey. The hardest part was explaining to his students what he was doing and why. He gathered his advanced class together and told them everything about the demonstration, about what he had learned, and about the opportunity he had been given. The reactions were mixed. Some students, particularly the younger ones like Tommy, were excited about their instructor's dedication to improvement. Others seemed confused or even betrayed, as if Marcus's admission of incomplete knowledge somehow diminished what he had taught them. "But Master Chen," said Janet, one of his long-term students, "you're already the best fighter in the region. Why do you need to learn from soldiers? We came here because you're a master." Marcus chose his words carefully. "Janet, I am a master of one particular approach to martial arts. But yesterday I discovered there are other approaches, more sophisticated ones. If I can learn them, I can become a better instructor for all of you." He arranged for Tommy to take over the day-to-day operations of the dojo, with assistance from 2 other senior students. Marcus would still own the school and return to teaching once his training was complete, but for the next year he would be a student again. The night before leaving for the palace training facility, Marcus held a farewell ceremony in his dojo. His students, friends, and even some competitors from other schools attended. Sarah gave a speech about her brother's courage in pursuing excellence even when it meant starting over. Tommy presented Marcus with a new uniform, plain white with no rank indicators symbolizing his willingness to begin again. But it was Marcus's own speech that surprised everyone, including himself. 15 years ago, Master Takeshi told me that the way of martial arts was a lifetime journey, not a destination. I thought I understood what he meant, but I was wrong. I thought the journey was about perfecting techniques and winning competitions. Now I realize it's about constantly discovering how much more there is to learn." He paused, looking at the faces of people who had believed in him, supported him, and learned from him. "I'm not leaving because I think what we've built here isn't good enough. I'm leaving because I want to make it better. When I come back, I'll bring new knowledge, new techniques, and a deeper understanding of what martial arts can be. But more importantly, I'll bring the humility to keep learning, no matter how much I think I know." The applause was warm but subdued. Marcus could see that some people still didn't fully understand his decision, but he also saw respect in many eyes, respect for someone willing to risk his reputation in pursuit of growth. That night, Marcus packed a single bag with essential clothes and personal items. He left his trophies, certificates, and photographs on the wall where they belonged, not as monuments to his past achievements, but as reminders of how far he had already come and how much further he might go. As he locked the dojo door for what would be the last time as the person he had been, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the excitement of not knowing what came next. For the first time since Master Takeshi's death, he was about to become a student again. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next morning, as his taxi pulled through the palace gates for the second time, Marcus was a different person than he had been 3 weeks earlier. He was no longer the legendary Marcus Chen, undefeated martial arts master. He was just Marcus, a student ready to learn what real mastery might actually look like. Commander Harrison met him at the entrance, wearing the same crisp uniform and carrying the same air of quiet authority. But this time, Marcus saw him differently. This wasn't just a military officer evaluating a civilian demonstration. This was a teacher who had offered to guide Marcus toward a level of understanding he had never imagined possible. "Welcome back, Marcus," the commander said, using his first name for the first time. "Are you ready to discover what you're really capable of?" Marcus shouldered his bag and took a deep breath. The man who had arrived here 3 weeks ago would have answered with supreme confidence. The man standing here now understood that confidence without knowledge was just another form of ignorance. "I'm ready to find out," Marcus replied, and meant every word. 1 year later, Marcus Chen stood in his dojo again, but everything had changed. The awards and photographs were still on the walls, the mats were the same ones he had trained on for years, and the morning sunlight still filtered through the windows in the same familiar patterns. But the man standing in the center of the room was fundamentally different from the one who had left. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first months at the Palace training facility had been the most challenging period of Marcus's life. True to Commander Harrison's warning, the program had required complete ego death. Marcus had trained alongside 20-year-old recruits who corrected his stances, studied textbooks on subjects he had never considered relevant to fighting, and failed at techniques he thought should have been simple. The worst moment had come, 3 months into the program, when he had asked to quit. The psychological pressure of constantly being wrong, constantly learning that his assumptions were incorrect, had become overwhelming. He had called Sarah from his small dormitory room, ready to return to his old life and the comfortable certainty of being the best fighter in his small world. "I don't think I can do this," he had told her, his voice breaking with exhaustion and frustration. Sarah had listened to him explain how the other trainees seemed to grasp concepts that eluded him, how the instructors treated his 15 years of experience as obstacles to overcome rather than assets to build upon. "Marcus," she had said gently, "do you remember what you told me about Master Takeshi? How he said the strongest people are those who can admit they don't know everything?" That conversation had changed something fundamental in Marcus's approach. Instead of fighting against the dissolution of his old understanding, he had begun to embrace it. He stopped trying to prove that his traditional training had value and started learning why it had limitations. He stopped defending his techniques and started understanding the science behind more effective ones. The breakthrough had come during his 6th month, during a session on combat psychology. The instructor, Dr. Chen, had been explaining how traditional martial arts often focused on technique while ignoring the mental and emotional states that determined how techniques would actually perform under stress. Most fighters, Dr. Chen had said, train their bodies extensively but never train their minds to handle the chaos of real confrontation. They perfect movements in controlled environments but fall apart when those movements are disrupted by unexpected variables. Suddenly, Marcus had understood why Lieutenant Stevens had been able to defeat him so easily. It wasn't just that Stevens had superior techniques. It was that Stevens had been trained to adapt those techniques in real time based on his opponent's reactions. Marcus had been fighting a predetermined sequence of movements while Stevens had been fighting Marcus himself. From that point forward, the training had become less about learning new techniques and more about developing a completely different relationship with combat. Marcus learned to read micro-expressions that revealed an opponent's intentions, to use environmental psychology to influence an adversary's decision-making, and to adapt his approach based on real-time analysis of multiple variables. He studied anatomy not just to know where to strike, but to understand how different personality types would react to different types of pressure. He learned physics to understand how to use minimal energy for maximum effect. He even studied computer science to understand how decision-making algorithms could be applied to human combat. The most surprising aspect of the training had been the emphasis on philosophy and ethics. The Royal Guard didn't just create more effective fighters. They created people who understood the responsibility that came with increased capability. Marcus learned that true mastery meant knowing not just how to fight, but when fighting was necessary and when it should be avoided entirely. Now standing in his dojo on his first day back, Marcus was preparing to share this knowledge with his students. But he was approaching it differently than he might have a year ago. Instead of announcing his return with grand demonstrations of new techniques, he had simply sent word that classes would resume as normal. Tommy arrived first, as Marcus had expected. His former assistant instructor had done an excellent job maintaining the dojo, but Marcus could see in his eyes the excitement of a student eager to learn what his teacher had discovered. "Master Chen," Tommy said, bowing formally. "Welcome home. We've all been wondering what you learned at the palace." Marcus returned the bow, noting how different the gesture felt now. A year ago, he had seen bowing as a ritual that reinforced his authority. Now he understood it as a recognition of the learning relationship that existed between all people, regardless of rank or experience. "I learned that everything we thought we knew was just the beginning," Marcus said. "But more importantly, I learned that the best way to teach new knowledge is to start with what people already understand and build from there." As other students arrived, Marcus began the class with the same warm-up routine they had always used. But as they moved through familiar forms, he offered small corrections and explanations that revealed deeper principles behind movements they had been practicing for years. "Sarah," he said to one of his intermediate students as she performed a blocking technique, "that movement is perfect technically. Now let me show you how to read your opponent's eye movements to predict which attack is coming, so you can position your block before they even commit to striking." The difference was subtle but profound. Instead of replacing what his students had learned, Marcus was expanding their understanding of why those techniques worked and how they could be enhanced. During the advanced class that evening, Marcus addressed the question he knew everyone was thinking. "I know you're curious about what the Royal Guard taught me, and over time I'll share all of it with you. But the most important thing I learned wasn't a technique or a strategy. I learned that mastery isn't about reaching a level where you know everything. It's about developing the ability to keep learning no matter how much you think you already know." He gestured to the photographs and awards on the wall. "Those represent real achievements, and I'm proud of them. But they also represent limitations, moments when I thought I had reached the end of my development instead of recognizing them as steps along a much longer path." Tommy raised his hand. "Master Chen, does this mean our training here wasn't good enough?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the same insecurity he had felt when his own worldview was challenged. "Tommy, everything we've learned here is valuable. But think of it this way. We've been studying one language of combat very thoroughly. Now we have the opportunity to become multilingual." Over the following months, Marcus gradually integrated the advanced concepts he had learned into his teaching, but he did it carefully, making sure his students understood each new level before moving to the next. He brought in guest instructors who specialized in psychology, anatomy, and tactical analysis. He arranged field trips to the palace training facility where his students could see demonstrations of advanced techniques. Most importantly, he changed the culture of the dojo from one focused on achieving mastery to one focused on pursuing continuous improvement. He encouraged questions about his teaching, created space for students to challenge techniques, and regularly brought in instructors from other disciplines to share different perspectives. The transformation wasn't just in the teaching methods, it was in Marcus himself. The man who had once needed to be the best fighter in the room had become someone who found joy in discovering new things he didn't know. The instructor who had once taught from a position of unquestionable authority had become a guide who learned alongside his students. A year after his return, Marcus received a visit from Lieutenant Stevens, who had been passing through the area on official business. Stevens observed an evening class and afterward spoke with Marcus privately. "You've built something remarkable here," Stevens said. "This isn't just a martial arts school anymore. It's a laboratory for human development." Marcus nodded, looking around the dojo that had become something far more sophisticated than anything he had originally envisioned. "The funny thing is, if you had told me 3 years ago that I would need to admit ignorance to become a better teacher, I would have thought you were insulting me. Now I realize it was the greatest gift anyone could have given me." Stevens smiled. "The commander will be pleased to hear that. He considers the civilian integration program one of our most important initiatives. Fighters like you take what we've learned and adapt it for the broader world." That evening, as Marcus locked up the dojo for the night, he paused to look at Master Takeshi's photograph. His old teacher's weathered face seemed to wear a knowing expression, as if he had always understood that this journey was exactly where Marcus's path would lead. "Strength without humility is just violence waiting to happen," Marcus whispered, finally understanding what Master Takeshi had been trying to teach him all those years ago. As he walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. 2 years ago, he had been the undefeated martial arts master who thought he had nothing left to learn. 1 year ago, he had been a humbled student discovering how much he didn't know.